How many of you have ever watched a movie and thought, wow, that feels fake? Maybe it was a giant monster, an explosion, or an action scene that just didn't feel quite real. Now think about movies like Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Jaws, or Batman and the Dark Knight. Even though some of those movies are decades old, many of their effects still look convincing today. The reason is simple. They relied heavily on practical effects rather than CGI. Now don't get me wrong, CGI has its place in filmmaking. There are things that just simply couldn't be done without computers. However, I believe filmmakers should prioritize practical effects whenever possible because they create more realistic visuals, improve actor performances, and help films stand the test of time. First, practical effects create more realistic visuals. One of the biggest advantages of practical effects is that they are real objects interacting with real environments, and when a camera films a miniature spaceship, an animatronic dinosaur, a physical explosion, the lighting, the shadows, and textures all occur naturally, and they don't have to be simulated. One of the greatest examples of this is in the original Star Wars trilogy. According to StarWars.com, many of the iconic spaceship battles were created using hand-built miniature models and practical effects rather than computers. Model makers spent countless hours building the spaceships and environments by hand. According to Lucasfilm, creating these effects was an incredibly difficult task because every detail had to be physically built and filmed. And there was no computer software that could fix their mistakes later. What's amazing is that nearly 50 years later, many of those scenes still look and feel impressive. And newer audience who grew up with CGI often praise the visual styles of those original films. Another great example of this is in Jurassic Park. According to Universal Pictures, they used practical effects and limited CGI to create dinosaurs that felt real. And even though the film was produced many years ago, many people still believe that the dinosaurs look better than they do today in today's modern films. Now why is that? Because practical effects have real weight and a physical presence. And computer can create something very visually impressive, but audiences often recognize when something is lacking. Now, practical effects naturally obey the laws of physics, and that's because they're actually there. And as a result, practical effects often create a more immersive viewing experience. Now that we've experienced how they create realism, let's talk about how they improve actor performances. When actors perform on a green screen stage, they have to imagine everything that they're performing with. They have to react to an environment that will only be added many months later during editing, which can be extremely difficult. When practical effects are used, actors can physically interact with their environment, and they can touch objects, move through real sets, and respond to things that are actually happening around them. George Lucas relied heavily on practical effects while creating the original Star Wars films. The actors weren't just standing on a green screen stage, they were surrounded by whole sets and environments that helped bring the story to life. According to George Lucas, in interviews piled in the Star Wars archives, he believed that creating and using practical effects was an important part of the story. When actors are immersed in a realistic environment, their performances often are more natural and convincing. The idea is also supported by filmmaker Christopher Nolan, who, according to interviews produced in American Cinematographer, he prefers practical effects whenever possible because they create a more authentic experience for both actors and audiences. Also, in The Dark Knight, Nolan famously flipped an actual semi-truck instead of recreating it with CGI. And more recently in Oppenheimer, he continued emphasizing practical techniques to show more realistic effects on screen. And when an actor reacts to real objects, their performance becomes more genuine, which translates to the audience. Practical effects can do more than perform realism. They help films stay on the test of time. Movies that relied heavily on CGI now look dated because technology evolves rapidly. Practical effects age much better. According the original Star Wars trilogy, produced in the late 70s, still pull in new generations of viewers. According to discussions on the Star Wars communities on Reddit, the original 6 are considered to be the golden era of Star Wars, and they're considered the best. And this appreciation comes from the practical effects, and this is the same that for Jaws and the Jurassic Park, because their practical effects still feel grounded in reality. Now, according to Industrial Light and Magic, using practical effects create a level of realism that audiences naturally respond to. Now, I understand some people might argue that CGI is cheaper, faster, or more flexible, and that's true, but this isn't an argument for getting rid of CGI. Instead, it's an argument to combine them both. The most successful movies combine them. Star Wars, Jurassic Park, and The Dark Knight all work alongside CGI and realistic effects to create films that are absolutely breathtaking. If filmmakers use practical effects whenever possible, it will continue to impress long after they're released. Today I've discussed 3 reasons why filmmakers should use practical effects. First, practical effects create more realistic visuals. They help improve actor performances, and they help films stand the test of time. Next time you watch a movie, take a look at the effects being used and ask yourself, does this scene feel real or fake? More often than not, the films that stand the test of time are the ones created by real craftsmen. Movies will continue to evolve, but some of the greatest scenes are always going to be created by real artists. Thank you.